Diane Crawford had worked at Lux and Sterling for 3 years. The upscale boutique sat in the heart of downtown, where gleaming windows displayed watches that cost more than her monthly rent and handbags she'd never dream of owning. She didn't mind. Diane wasn't there for the luxury. She was there because the pay was steady. The hours worked with her night classes, and she genuinely loved helping people find something special. At 42, Diane had learned to move through the world with quiet grace. Her smile was warm, her voice soft but clear. She treated every customer the same, whether they wore designer suits or simple jeans. That's just who she was. Raised by her grandmother in a small apartment on the east side, Diane understood struggle. She also understood dignity. The store owner, Richard Caldwell, was a different story. Tall, silver-haired, and always dressed like he was heading to a yacht club. Richard had inherited the business from his father. He didn't build it, he just maintained it. And lately, maintaining it meant watching people like a hawk, especially certain people. Diane noticed it in small ways at first. How Richard's eyes followed young black men who entered the store. How his jaw tightened when someone without a shopping bag from another luxury store walked in. He never said anything outright, but his body language screamed suspicion. "Diane," he'd say, his tone clipped. "Keep an eye on that section." He'd nod toward wherever a black or Latino customer happened to be browsing. She'd nod politely, but inside, something twisted. She never followed his silent orders. Instead, she'd approach those customers with the same warmth she gave everyone else, asking if they needed help, offering genuine service. Richard noticed. His smiles toward her grew thinner, his comments sharper. "You're too trusting," he told her one afternoon, after she'd spent 20 minutes helping a young man pick out a gift for his mother. "Not everyone who walks in here belongs." Diane said nothing, but she felt the words settle heavy in her chest. A familiar ache she'd carried her whole life. Part 2. The line gets drawn. It was a rainy Thursday when everything shifted. Diane was restocking a display of leather wallets near the front when the door chimed. A young black man stepped inside, shaking water from his jacket. He wore a simple hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, nothing flashy, but clean. He looked around with quiet curiosity, the way first-time visitors often did. Richard was at the counter, and Diane saw his posture change instantly. His shoulders squared. His eyes narrowed. He didn't move, but his presence filled the room with tension. The young man walked slowly toward the watch display, hands in his pockets, just looking. Diane approached him with a smile. "Hi there. Can I help you find something today?" He glanced at her, clearly relieved by the kindness. "Yeah, actually. I'm looking for a nice watch. Something classic, you know? For myself." "Absolutely. Let me show you a few options." Diane guided him toward the mid-range collection, explaining features and styles. He listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions. Then Richard's voice cut through. "Excuse me." Both Diane and the customer turned. Richard stood a few feet away, arms crossed. "Sir, those watches start at several $1,000s. Are you sure you're in the right place?" The air froze. The young man's face hardened slightly, but he kept his voice even. "I'm just looking, man. Is that a problem?" "We have a policy," Richard said coldly. "If you're not here to make a purchase, I'd prefer you browse elsewhere. This isn't a museum." Diane's heart hammered. "Richard, he's a customer. Diane, I'll handle this." His tone left no room for argument. The young man stared at Richard for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, no problem." He turned and walked out, water still dripping from his jacket. The door closed behind him, and the silence felt suffocating. Diane looked at Richard, her voice shaking despite her effort to stay calm. That wasn't right. Richard didn't even look at her. "That's business, Diane. You'll understand when you've been doing this as long as I have." She wanted to scream. Instead, she swallowed the fire rising in her throat and returned to her work. Hands trembling. Part 3. The weight of silence. The incident haunted Diane for days. She replayed it over and over, the young man's face. The quiet dignity in how he left without causing a scene. The shame she felt for not doing more. She'd said something, yes, but not enough. Not nearly enough. Richard, meanwhile, acted as if nothing had happened. He moved through the store with the same cold authority, greeting wealthy customers with charm and watching others with suspicion. Diane noticed he'd been doing it more often now, emboldened perhaps by the fact that she hadn't pushed back harder. Her coworker, Angela, a young white woman who'd been there about a year, pulled Diane aside during their break. "I saw what happened Thursday," Angela said quietly, stirring her coffee. "That was messed up." Diane nodded, grateful someone else had noticed. "It's not the first time." "Really?" Angela's eyes widened. "Has he always been like this?" "It's gotten worse over the past year," Diane admitted. "Little comments. The way he watches certain people. I've tried to balance it out by being extra welcoming, but..." She trailed off, feeling the weight of powerlessness. Angela frowned. "You should report him." "To who?" "He owns the place." Diane's laugh was bitter. "And honestly, Angela, I need this job. I'm 3 classes away from finishing my degree. I can't afford to make waves." Angela reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I get it. But this isn't right, Diane. Someone needs to do something." Diane appreciated the solidarity, but she knew the reality. People like her, people who'd spent their whole lives navigating spaces that weren't built for them, understood the cost of speaking up. It wasn't fear. It was survival. That weekend, Diane sat in her small apartment, staring at her laptop. She had an essay due for her business ethics class. The topic, corporate responsibility and social justice. The irony wasn't lost on her. She thought about quitting. She thought about confronting Richard directly. But mostly, she thought about that young man, wherever he was, and hoped he knew that not everyone saw him the way Richard had. She didn't know that hope would matter more than she imagined. Part 4. The breaking point. Monday morning arrived with unexpected news. Diane was opening the store when Richard stormed in. His face flushed, holding his phone like it was a weapon. "Did you see this?" he snapped, shoving the screen toward her. Diane squinted at a social media post. It was from a local community page, and someone had written about their experience at Lux and Sterling, how they'd been treated with suspicion and asked to leave simply for browsing. The post didn't name Richard directly, but anyone familiar with the store would know it had been shared hundreds of times. "This is slander," Richard hissed. "I'm going to find out who posted this and sue them." Diane's stomach twisted. She recognized the description. It was about the young man from Thursday. "Richard, maybe this is a chance to what? Apologize for protecting my business?" His eyes flashed. "I've built this store's reputation on exclusivity. If I let every kid in the hoodie wander around, what message does that send to my real clients?" Diane felt something crack inside her. "Your real clients? You know what I mean." "No, Richard, I don't." "Explain it to me." He stared at her, and for the first time, she saw something dangerous in his expression. "Diane, I've been patient with your idealism. But if you can't support how I run my business, maybe you should reconsider your position here." The threat hung in the air, clear as glass. Diane's hands trembled, but her voice came out steady. "Are you firing me?" "I'm saying you need to decide whose side you're on." She wanted to walk out right then. Every fiber of her being screamed to leave with her dignity intact. But her mind flashed to her rent, her tuition, her grandmother's medical bills she helped with. She swallowed the fire in her throat. "I understand." Richard nodded, satisfied, and walked to his office. Diane stood alone on the sales floor, feeling smaller than she ever had. But something else stirred beneath the shame, a quiet, growing resolve. She didn't know what she could do, but she knew she couldn't let this continue. That night, she pulled out her phone and did something she'd never done before. She took screenshots of the store's employment handbook, specifically the sections on discrimination and customer service standards. Then she started documenting dates, incidents, everything she could remember. If Richard wanted to play this game, she'd be ready. Part 5. The unexpected ally. 3 days later, the young man came back. Diane was adjusting a display when the door chimed. She looked up and froze. It was him, same hoodie, same quiet presence. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood an older black man, probably in his 60s, wearing an impeccably tailored suit and carrying himself with the kind of quiet authority that filled a room without effort. His silver-rimmed glasses caught the light as he surveyed the store. Richard appeared from the back almost immediately, drawn by some sixth sense. His expression shifted through several emotions: confusion, recognition, then something close to panic. The older man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Richard Caldwell?" "Yes," Richard said, his voice uncertain for the first time since Diane had known him. "Can I help you?" "I'm Marcus Webb. This is my son, Jordan." He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "I believe you two met last week." Richard's face paled. Diane watched from behind the counter, her heart hammering. Marcus Webb. The name clicked suddenly. He was a prominent attorney in the city, known for civil rights cases. His face had been in the papers just last month for winning a major discrimination lawsuit. "There must be some misunderstanding," Richard stammered. "No misunderstanding," Marcus said calmly. "My son came in to browse, as any customer has the right to do, and you asked him to leave based on what exactly? His appearance? His age? His race? I run a high-end establishment. I have the right to refuse service. To anyone, yes, but not for discriminatory reasons. That violates both state and federal law." Marcus pulled out a business card and placed it on the counter. "I'm here as a courtesy, Richard, to inform you that my firm is exploring legal options regarding this incident and any pattern of similar behavior." Richard's jaw worked silently. "However," Marcus continued, his tone softening slightly, "I'm also a believer in education over litigation when possible. If you're willing to acknowledge what happened, implement real changes, and make this right, we can discuss alternatives." Diane felt tears prick her eyes. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about dignity, about change. Richard looked cornered, desperate. His eyes found Diane's across the room, and she saw him searching for an ally. She looked away. "I'll need time to consider," Richard said finally, his voice hollow. "You have 48 hours. Marcus picked up his card. "After that, we proceed formally." "Good day, Richard." Father and son turned to leave. As they passed Diane, Marcus paused. "Thank you for your kindness last week. Jordan told me about you. That matters more than you know." Diane nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The door closed behind them, and the silence that followed felt different, charged with the electricity of change. Part 6. The Reckoning Begins. Richard closed the store early that day. Diane watched him pace his office through the glass partition, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand running through his silver hair over and over. She couldn't hear the conversations, but she could read the stress in every movement. Angela sidled up beside her. "What's happening?" "Change," Diane said quietly. "Maybe." The next morning, Richard called a staff meeting. Besides Diane and Angela, there were only 2 other employees, both part-timers who rarely overlap shifts. They gathered in the back room, uncomfortable in the cramped space. Richard looked like he hadn't slept. "I want to address something that's come to my attention. There's been a complaint about how we handle customer service, specifically regarding profiling." Diane remained silent, watching. "Moving forward," Richard continued, his voice strained, "we'll be implementing new policies. Everyone is to be greeted equally. No assumptions based on appearance. I'll be bringing in a consultant to conduct sensitivity training." One of the part-timers, a young guy named Kevin, raised his hand. "Is this about that social media post?" Richard's jaw tightened. "This is about maintaining professional standards." After the meeting dispersed, Richard pulled Diane aside. His expression was complicated, part resentment, part something else she couldn't quite read. "I know you saw what happened with the Webb family," he said quietly. "And I know you've been uncomfortable with some of my decisions." And Diane met his eyes steadily. "Yes, I have. I'm trying to do the right thing here. The consultant, the new policies, it's real. But I need my staff to support this, not undermine it." He paused. "Can I count on you?" She wanted to believe him. Part of her recognized that change rarely came from people enthusiastically embracing it more often. It came from people backed into corners who chose growth over destruction. "I'll support real change," Diane said carefully. "But Richard, this can't just be about avoiding a lawsuit. If you're serious, it has to come from understanding why what you did was wrong." He flinched but nodded. "I'm working on that." Over the next week, things shifted. The consultant, a sharp woman named Dr. Patricia Jones, came in and spent hours with the staff. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She talked about implicit bias, systemic racism, and the responsibility of businesses to serve all communities. Richard sat through every session, visibly uncomfortable but present. Diane began to see cracks in his armor moments, where he asked genuine questions, where shame flickered across his face, where he seemed to truly grapple with his actions. Thought it wasn't redemption yet. But it was a start. Part 7. The moment of truth, 2 weeks after Marcus Webb's visit. Jordan returned to the store. This time, he came alone, and this time, he was greeted immediately by Richard himself. "Welcome to Luke's and Sterling," Richard said, his voice steady despite the tension Diane could see in his shoulders. "Can I help you find something today?" Jordan studied him for a long moment, and Diane held her breath. "I'm still interested in that watch," Jordan said finally. "The one your employee showed me before." Diane stepped forward with a genuine smile. "I remember. Let me get it for you." What followed was remarkable in its normalcy. Jordan tried on several watches. Richard and Diane both offered opinions, discussed features, and treated him exactly as they would any customer. When Jordan selected a beautiful classic timepiece, one of the most expensive in the store, Richard processed the payment with professionalism and even warmth. As Richard carefully packaged the watch, he paused. "Mr. Webb, I owe you an apology. What I did when you first came in was wrong. It came from prejudice I'm only now beginning to recognize and address. You deserved better. Every customer deserves better." The store went silent. Jordan looked surprised, then nodded slowly. "I appreciate you saying that. Seriously, that takes courage." "It's the bare minimum," Richard said quietly. "But I'm committed to doing more." After Jordan left, Diane found herself alone with Richard near the closing hour. "That was good," she said. "What you said to him." Richard leaned against the counter, suddenly looking older and more tired than she'd ever seen him. "Diane, I've been thinking a lot these past weeks. About my father, about how he ran this place. About things I just accepted as normal. Dr. Jones has been helping me see how much damage that mindset causes. It's a process. Diane said gently. I also want to apologize to you for how I've treated you, for dismissing your concerns, for making you feel like you couldn't speak up. You were trying to show me a better way, and I was too arrogant to listen. Diane felt tears sting her eyes. Thank you. That means a lot. I'd like to make you assistant manager, Richard continued, with a raise and a real voice in how we operate. This place needs someone with your values helping to guide it. Diane blinked in surprise. Really? Really? I can't undo the past, but I can try to build a better future. Will you help me? She smiled through her tears. Yes, I will. Part 8. The new chapter. 3 months later. Looks and Sterling looked different. The physical space remained elegant and upscale, but the atmosphere had transformed. The staff had grown to include more diverse voices. The customer base had expanded too, as word spread that the store had genuinely changed. Diane, now assistant manager, had implemented community outreach programs, partnerships with local organizations, styling workshops open to everyone, and a scholarship fund for students pursuing business degrees. Richard had continued working with Dr. Jones, attending workshops and slowly unlearning decades of unconscious bias. It wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks, difficult conversations, and moments of frustration. But he stayed committed. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus Webb walked in with his wife. Diane greeted them warmly. I heard about the changes here, Marcus said, looking around approvingly. Jordan told me about his last visit. I wanted to see for myself. Richard emerged from the back and extended his hand. Mr. Webb, it's good to see you. They shook hands, and something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement perhaps, that the work of change was ongoing but real. We're looking for anniversary gifts, Marcus said. Diane, could you help us? As Diane guided them through the store, she felt a deep sense of peace. This wasn't a fairy tale ending where everything was perfect. Racism and prejudice didn't disappear because one store owner had a change of heart. The world still held countless challenges, but this small victory, this space transformed, this community building, this mattered. That evening, as Diane locked up the store, she paused to look at her reflection in the glass. She saw herself clearly, not the woman who'd been dismissed and diminished, but the woman who'd held on to her dignity, who documented and prepared, who'd allowed others to fight alongside her, and who'd chosen to help build something better rather than simply walk away. Her grandmother used to say that change doesn't come from loud voices alone. Sometimes it comes from quiet strength, from people who show up every day and refuse to accept that things can't be different. Diane smiled at her reflection. She'd finished her degree last month. She had plans, big plans, for where her life might go next. But for now, she was exactly where she needed to be, doing work that mattered, in a space that was finally becoming what it should have been all along, a place where everyone was welcome, where dignity was universal, and where one woman's quiet courage had helped tip the scales toward justice. She turned off the lights and walked into the evening air, carrying that truth with her like a lantern in the dark. Retry.